That's up to you, depending on how much space you have.
All right, it's recording.
All right.
All right.
Well, welcome all of our viewers. My name is John Flora, and I'm running for NJ-10, U.S. House of Representatives. I would like to represent you and your family, but I think in order to do that effectively, it starts with conversations with people in the community. It starts with a confession that I do not know everything, and my constituents, us together, we know more as a community, and it starts with these types of conversations. Joining me today in a session titled COVID-19, Adding Insult to Infection is the John Robinson. John is a scientist. He has credentials. He has heart. He's in the community. But most importantly, in the role of this campaign, he's a vice chair, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, the vice chair of ADOS New Jersey. So at this point, as the candidate, you've heard enough from me. I want to pass this over to John and let him tell us a little bit about himself and about his role in ADOS New Jersey. First of all, what does ADOS even stand for, and how does that intersect with a campaign like one that I'm running right now in NJ-10?
Sure. Hey, thanks, John, for having me on. My name is John Robinson. As John Flora just said, I am the one of the vice chairs of the organization. It's a civil rights organization, ADOS NJ. So it's basically one of the chapters around the U.S. of ADOS. ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. So slavery as an institution. We're a civil rights organization, like I said. And basically what our purpose is for fighting for the civil rights of those that have Americans that have descended from the unfortunate legacy of slavery and everything that happened afterwards, whether that's black codes, Jim Crow, redlining, blockbusting, the crack epidemic, mass incarceration, all those things, those various some will even say that slavery never actually ended. It just kind of changed forms. That has caused a lot of disparities, socioeconomic issues, psychological issues, and health disparities, which we'll probably go into, I think, a little bit later on today. A district like NJ-10 has a high percentage of ADOS. So that's a high percentage. And ADOS is basically similar term of Afro-American, was Afro-American 2.0 kind of. The reason we strayed away from Afro-American basically has to do with the fact that, if you say Irish American, Ireland is a country. You say Swedish American, Sweden is a country. Africa is actually a continent. Furthermore, we are American. So we, this is where our lineage is. Many of us, if we did a DNA test of those ancestry.com kind of tests, you would see that there's a huge mixture of different cultures in there, and that has to do directly with the system of slavery that we were talking about in the ADOS, that's the S in ADOS. So NJ-10 is a large ADOS district. So, as John Flora, as you already know, you are the only candidate that we are actually supporting pretty much in the entire nation, whether we're talking about, on the presidential level, or we're talking about, Senate, any of those kinds of things. You're the only one that ADOS NJ is actually supporting. We have let the other chapters know about your advocacy and your civil rights platform. It's definitely a testament to your courage to be one of the only ones who actually has the ADOS101.com Black agenda basically on your website as a civil rights platform. So.
Thank you, John. Well, NJ-10 is, like to John's point, it is a majority Black district. There are only 25, 26 across the entire United States when you look at congressional districts, 435 of them. So to say that we're in an ADOS concentrated district, it's an important statement. It's also important to know the context nationally, why we're taking on this agenda and putting it front and center with the experts in the field and the people who this means so much too. I see this moving forward as an education campaign as much as it is civil rights advocacy and front and center, regardless of race, creed, ethnicity. I think it's just the issue that needs to be brought to the forefront of the Congress. We're going to get to that in a little bit, how that's been playing out over the last few years and even decades. But right now, this discussion is focused primarily about what COVID is doing to expose racial disparities in the United States. So we could get back on the main highway, just for a second, talk about some of the issues. One that I was doing a little homework on locally is policing, the response to people who are disobeying stay-at-home orders. In early May, the NYPD just released a 6-week study of data. And it showed that minority communities are being impacted to a far worse extent than the rest of the population. Couple of quick stats if you're ready. This was just the first 6 weeks of COVID. 374 summons were issued. Of those, 304 were Black or brown communities in New York City, sorry. So we're talking about 81% of the summons that were issued were Black and brown summons. And let's get into the arrest, which is definitely a more severe thing as far as law enforcement interaction goes. 40 arrests were made in this span related to violating these social distancing stay-at-home orders. Of that amount, John, do you have any idea how many were people who were African American of the 40?
You are referring to this one on the screen.
The 40 arrests, correct. Thank you. Wow, you got it. You're one step ahead of me. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so come on, look at this. 35 Black arrests, right? 4 Hispanic, and you got to throw the 1 white one in there. I think they just threw that one in somehow. Somebody took one for the team, but that's my speculation. Don't put me on record.
Was that you, John? Did you get arrested?
I did not, and I'm not giving you my hands. Fist in the air. But do you just want to talk about this, how this is a microcosm of what historically ADOS has been challenged with, and our district, Essex County, Hudson County, New Jersey as well. Do you have some context ADOS-wise to plug in there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if we just scroll through, you'll see that things don't change. So this is COVID, as you mentioned, John. And this the first statistic had to do with Brooklyn. But if we scroll through, we see that you can see the same thing actually in New York as well. So here's New York City. Notice the chart is basically still the same, 68% for Black, 24%. Now, you'll say to yourself, well, we're in a progressive era now. This is no more stop and frisk kind of stuff going on in New York City. But actually, unfortunately, here, look at this. This is at the height of stop and frisk. You'll see this number. Pay attention to this number, 53%.
Yeah.
Here you see 34%. Here you see 9%. All right, this is at the height of stop and frisk. But now we're in a progressive place, right? Well, look at that. The numbers stay the same.
Stay the same.
It's lowered for Hispanic people, but look here for our Black population. And we can really run through the map on a lot of this data, and this is actually reflective from all over the place. If we look at incarceration rates around the nation, you'll see that even though the Black people make up a little bit over 13% of the population, you'll notice that that the incarceration rates, the arrest rates are much higher. I mean, we're talking, when I say much higher, I'm talking about disproportionately higher, 30%, 40%, depending on what poll you actually look at and you use. But this is a huge problem, and it plays out in other areas as well. So just let me shut this off.
I hope while you're getting that ready, I hope we're going to go down the road of life trajectory and job opportunities that are linked to this, educational opportunities, student loan opportunities. There's so much linked to having a clean record versus being incarcerated.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't have all of that data. See, what I like to do is I like to show data on things, so that way people don't think that you're just kind of, you know, shooting off at the hip. Oh, especially when it comes to issues with Black people, because a lot of times we hear, oh well, if they would only put down the bottle, or if they would only stop smoking weed, or if they would only do this, or if they would only do that. And you know, it's a matter of that there's something wrong. That at least the take-home message is that there's something inherently wrong with Black people, that's not wrong with anybody else.
And if
And
they would only fix that, then these disproportionate attacks would stop, right?
right, exactly, and it's not
Yeah.
like that.
So
So
where can people find some of this data that you're talking about? Because I don't want to put you on the spot right now.
sure.
I know you have it.
Yeah, so some of the data, what I'll do is, if you want to post it, if you want to post some of it to your site, or if you have something else that you
Be
share it to,
happy.
I could send it to you.
Or in the comments below this video, you know, when we share. So
Yeah, absolutely. So we can do that. But the New York City ACLU, so the ACLU has a lot of the data as far as racial disparities when it comes to certain things.
yeah,
You know, and gender disparities, any sort of discrimination that may exist, they
yep,
tend to have a lot of this data on. So it
got
may
it.
not be in a nice, neat chart like I did it, because I actually, you know, put things together and put it in a chart, but you could still get it. So
Got it. How about the website ADOS 101? Does that have some statistical data and things that can
ADOS,
help people in their arguments, you know?
right. So ADOS101.com actually has information on there regarding some reading, some of the literature where we get some of our information from. There's
Okay.
also the report, "What We Get Wrong About Closing the Racial Wealth Gap." That was a report written by Dr. William Darity, also attorney Antonio Moore, and a couple other experts also, and
Nice.
talking about the wealth gap, and how that can't be overcome by working harder, by going to college, and things like that. And actually, I know it seems like it's a disjointed conversation, but all these things add together, to whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about disparities, and how the policing and the law enforcement is handled in dealing
Sure.
Black people with Black people versus Hispanic people versus white people versus Asian people. So
Got it. Got it. Thank you. If we could segue a little bit into the health sciences, let's talking about the disproportionate morbidity, mortality in Black communities. I'll give a quick example of Wisconsin, a very extreme example. In Wisconsin, African Americans make up 6% of the statewide population, yet they account for 40% of the mortality. So when we take a closer snapshot to this district, congressionally, looking in on New Jersey, Essex County does not account for the highest percentage of infection, yet the county accounts for, you know where I'm going with this, the highest rate of death. Now, Essex County is 42% African American, last census data showed. So could we have this conversation for a second? Why are
yeah,
African Americans dying at such a high rate compared to infection rates nationally?
right. So we see here, I'm displaying something else, another line, but this is nationally, and this is reported as of May 11th,
Okay,
2020. And here's a link below where you can actually get this data, this research. But look, it's showing deaths by race. Now, when you look at it in the context of all the different ones that are getting populated, you'll see that this amount of 17,000 is actually a disproportionate percentage. Now, when I say disproportionate, whenever I talk about that, I'm always talking about keeping in mind the number of Afro-Americans or Black people in the country. So it's roughly right around 13.4%. It may go up or down depending on which poll you use. But you'll notice that in all of the health categories where we're talking about mortality, morbidity, whether we're talking about cardiovascular issues, you're going to see a similarly disproportionate amount of Afro-Americans or Black people in those negative categories, basically. And what you should see in a society that is equal is you should see, you know, if there's a certain ethnicity or a certain group that is 13% or 10%, then you should see that 10% or 13% or whatever it is across all different planes, whether you're talking about morbidity or COVID-19 deaths or whatever it may be. So
Sure.
here's,
So what percentage does this count out to be, John? It looks higher than 12, 13, even 15% when we look at
yes,
Black Death on this chart.
right. So here we actually have the percentage. So
Nice.
if you look here, you'll see we're Afro-American, we're right about the 30% mark almost. Now keep
So,
remember, we're at 13.5%. So this is probably about 2.5 times what it should be. If we were in an equal and just society, it's about 2.5 times. This does not represent our numbers, our representation within the country.
wow.
So that's just nationally, and it's from the same numbers. It's just we took these numbers and put them in a nice, cute bar graph here.
So we're not just talking about what we feel and what we're
No,
seeing on the news. We're talking
no.
about updated data and
This
breaking
is
it into.
raw. This is updated data as of May 11th, 2020.
Thank you, John. You know, what about the Latinx, Asian, Native American communities? I'm hearing things about raising bias crimes, increased rates against Asian Americans, as if, you know, the president's narrative, this is the Chinese virus, so let's go and attack the Asians who live locally in our community. And we have Latinx community that is, they're disproportionately our frontline workers, dealing in the food industry, service industry. All of a sudden their jobs are shut down, or disproportionately they're being asked to go to work on these frontline jobs without correct PPE. And I also read something interesting about the Native American tribes nationally being hit percentage-wise. They're among the hardest when it comes to morbidity and economic impact. When you look at that, every casino that is one of their primary sources of you know, income and their tax base has completely been just destroyed. Everything's shut down. And they're kind of like on these islands on their own. So to kind of tie it all together, I know ADOS is its own entity, but as an elected official for, you know, nationally, constituents, I would have to be aware of all of these different subgroups nationally, what's happening to our Latinx, our Asian Americans, and our American Indian tribes. So could you put that in context with ADOS and sometimes how they take away from ADOS? I know we've had these conversations in the past. What would you do as
Sure.
a congressman? How would I handle that? Can we
Okay,
help?
right. So yeah, so within each, and this is part of the problem when we use terms like minority or
Yes.
POC, people of color, right? Because you know, as you mentioned, John, just now, you know, even bringing up the whole, you know, Native Americans and a lot of them working in casinos and things like that, and now not being able to do that. I mean, that's not even something that even crossed my mind
Okay.
as far as a thing, because each group may have its own set of issues. Now with ADOS, there are we have our basically our bones and the blood of our lineage is buried here in this country. That's what the country was built off of. And so there's specificity in what needs to get done with ADOS. When you look at Native Americans, there's specificity in what needs to get done with them. You know, and there was, right? I mean, there's obviously still ongoing things, but you know, there was some specificity in how the government dealt with them. Same thing with Japanese Americans that were in internment camps, right? There was
Right.
specific redress that needed to go to that particular group. So I think that you know, as you know, someone such as yourself that's running for a federal office, I mean, I think it's really important to not, you know, categorize, you know, here's white, and then here's everybody else in the
Everybody else.
POC category, you know. So, you know,
Right.
it's because each of the groups have their own separate issues. And of
Yeah.
course, there's, within individual families and households and towns, of course. But if we are going to break things up as far as race or culture, ethnicity, then and we're talking about some of the problems that are endemic in those communities, then
Yes.
we need to like look at those specific communities and not do this whole big people of color kind of thing.
Or
So
class warfare to say, oh, it's the 1% versus everyone else, because
right.
everyone else is in a different boat when you really zoom in on everyone else.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think it's important that we make those specific distinctions, especially as a
Yes.
policy person. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to go even further, I would say, so obviously with ADOS, it's reparations and a Black agenda.
Yeah.
With society as a whole, there needs to be, I think that there needs to be a restructuring in how capitalism kind of works, because if we look at even Chris Hedges' book, America: The Farewell Tour, it talks about some of the evils of this form of capitalism, basically laissez-faire. And so there need to be certain safety nets that are put in, whether we're talking about Medicare for all, or we're talking about some sort of universal income kind of program, or we're talking about retraining with certain professions and occupations. There's some big policies that could be brought in to try to help create more of a safety net. But then you also need to look at the specifics as well.
Thank you for bringing that up to my attention and helping to craft some of my outlook on this election, and how the big umbrella terms aren't sufficient for a district like NJ-10.
Right.
It needs to be addressed with more specificity. Educational disparities. I'm a lifetime educator. I'm a student of education policy, ongoing. Right. For a second, we don't have to get too deep on this, but cities depend more on a community school model to be in person, to get that free breakfast, to get that free lunch, to see those doctors in the school and the nurses, and just get a little bit more than just the curriculum, so to speak. The lack of internet access, disproportionately affecting our urban children, our urban environments for learning. The access to equipment and devices, to have a sufficient amount of those at home, instead of 1 for 3 children at home, or none in the home. We're still in Jersey City distributing Chromebooks and trying to do fundraisers now just to get our students to see our assignments for the last 8 weeks. So how does that intersect with ADOS and the educational disparities when you look at life trajectory for a white student, Asian student versus, the ADOS child right now in the heart of Newark or Irvington or Hillside or Jersey City,
Right.
I mean, we could touch on it, but I wanted to see your thoughts on that, because I think about that every night before I go to sleep. So.
Sure. And I mean, one thing that you didn't mention, which you actually fought for, has to do with this toxic redlining, right? Like with the lead in the water. So we won't even go into there, but that also plays into the educational behavioral role, right? And some of the things that you as an educator need to deal with.
And the percentage of students with disabilities, right, as a result of that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a big thing. But going back to your point, I mean, the socioeconomic situation of an area, is directly tied to real estate, is directly tied to education, what resources can be provided. I had the fortune to be able to when I went to high school, I went to a great high school. It was not a public high school, it was a private high school. I was a scholarship kid. And I went there, and I also, it was called Lawrenceville, a school called Lawrenceville, but we were right next to Princeton. So you have Lawrenceville, you have Princeton, and we would interact with a lot of the students in Princeton and things like that. I'm talking about Princeton High School. It's a public school, and the type of resources that they had access to, the type of education and just the niceness of the school. You would go there and you're in a completely different world. And when you juxtapose that to, Jersey City public education and the resources that are available. It's two totally different worlds. And you say, well, what's the difference? And you look, and there's a huge socioeconomic difference. And I mean, this, John, because you push against the grain with a lot of things. It's that the schools have to get funded based off of the taxes, the real estate taxes, and if you're in a socioeconomically depraved area, the real estate taxes are probably not going to be sufficient or as sufficient, what you need to provide the resources for the amount of students that you're going to actually have in that area. So
Thank you for saying that, John.
I am not an educator or anything like that, but I've definitely been doing work in the city of Jersey City for a lot of years, with the teens and with youth and things like that. And I've seen it, and also as a business owner that tries to provide recreational activities for kids. A lot of the recreation that I have to provide for my company, it's a for-profit company, I provide for free for kids in Jersey City and in Newark and things like that, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to enjoy it. Now, if I go to other areas of New Jersey that are more affluent, that's not even, it's kind of like, how much do you want? Let me sign the check. It's a completely different thing.
Thank you for bringing that up as a private business owner who brings the nonprofit heart to a city like Jersey City. I've seen John at Columbia Park events firsthand. Just literally the trucks out there, and kids don't want to talk to adults; they want to be gaming, and then they'll talk to you about that. So thank you, John. Thank you for your actual experience walking the walk. And to that earlier point, also about the tax levy, it was just increased by over 30%, and taxpayers are already up in arms in Jersey City. Yet, compared to other municipalities throughout the state, we're still around half the rate that they're charging their local property owners. So just to put that in context, a city has values by the way they set up their budget. A budget is a moral document, and we can't forget that, even at the congressional federal level. When 435 are sitting around a discretionary budget of $1.3 trillion, that is a value conversation.
Right.
How are we going to slice that up by race, by ethnicity, by past grievances, by children, by our military? So you're looking at somebody who's ready to fight, somebody who's ready to have those hard public conversations. I want you to know that, John. I need you and ADOS to know that. And the rest of NJ-10.
Well, you're gonna need all the help that you can get, as far as just having that buffer around you, so you don't get corrupted. Because I mean, I imagine that it's gonna be it's a lot of temptation, when you're out there on Capitol Hill to compromise and to try to get things through.
Yeah, let's talk about the money for a second, because I believe, and this is my first priority as a candidate for public office, that a candidate's orientation to fundraising tells you everything about their future responsiveness to you. I'll say that again. The way we raise money should tell you everything you need to know about what kind of elective official we're going to be. Hopefully. We can't predict somebody's behavior in a year or two from now, but there are some predictors that tell us. I believe fundraising is a key one. Let's talk about my opponent, Donald Payne Jr., for just 1 second. Sure. I'll start by saying we pride ourselves in asking everybody for $1, $5, $10, and sometimes they give a little more, but we encourage them to not give more than a certain threshold because we don't want it. This is about your engagement, your participatory democracy that you live in. We want you engaged, not your money. We need a little bit of your money just to be competitive. Our opponent, 98% of his fundraising comes from large donors, but mostly political action committees. We're talking about big labor unions around the country, big law firms. That's his number one industry by profession. So it's just very disheartening when you see fossil fuel industries writing a check for $5,000, and then we're going to greenwash and say, oh, you know, as a politician for NJ-10, I'm very active on the environmental justice front, and I'm aware of climate change. Yet, I just took a check from Phillips 66 for $5,000. And these are actual numbers. Or Exxon for $1,000. Or I'm on the front lines with the CBC, right? Fighting for civil rights and HR 40. We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm also going to take a check from Comcast. We'll get to that in a second. I'm going to let you get to that for $3,500 this cycle. So that is what we're up against, not only money-wise, but future promise-wise. How can you believe somebody who's saying they're in the civil rights fight or the climate justice fight when they're taking money from the antagonists? So I'm going to leave this ball in your court, John, on HR 40. You know, how do we trust Representative Payne? How can we hopefully trust John Flora? What do you think as a constituent and an ADOS chair, you know?
Right. So you said a lot of things there, which each one of those things we could probably spend a whole night talking on.
We
But
can.
so yeah, the HR 40. Let me start with the CBC in general. The Congressional Black Caucus.
Yep.
ADOS NJ doesn't support any of the Congressional Black Caucus for re-election right now.
Okay.
And the reason for that has to do with the lack of civil rights advocacy that have happened over decades of time.
Yes.
And it's actually very disheartening for us as ADOS, not the organization, but just in general, because we try to spread the message of, hey, this is what's going on. You may want to vote for these individuals, but they're not going to do anything for you. As a matter of fact, they're going to vote against you. And that's been a big issue, you know, just in our dealings and our conversations with other fellow ADOS. So when we look at Payne, who you are running against, who's the incumbent, a lot of ADOS in Newark or in Irvington, East Orange, they don't know those things about him. And if they do, they believe that he is advocating on their behalf, and that is not true. So when you mentioned about the $3,500 that was taken from Comcast, I'm sure the reason that you mentioned that is because of the Civil Rights Act of 1866.
Thank you, John.
Which was we as ADOS, NJ, New York City ADOS, DMV, a lot of ADOS from other chapters all over. We went and we stood on the steps of the Supreme Court because Comcast was, they were trying to overturn a ruling for the using the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Basically, what that said is how it is after slaves were free from chattel slavery in America, after they were set free, there were a series of amendments and there were civil rights acts that were enacted. 1866 basically said that, you know what, a company or organization or a government cannot discriminate based off of race in any kind of capacity. So if you as an employee or as a business owner are going to seek for a contract or employment or a raise or whatever, and there is, and the employer says, well, we don't like you because you come in late, because you are, you have a nasty disposition, because you're Black, and because blah, 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 blah. Then because they say, we're not going to do this because you're Black, or because you're Latinx, or because you're whatever, then ordinarily you'd be able to actually file a lawsuit. Now, what happened with the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was you now have to prove that race is the only reason that a company actually says, hey, we don't want to do business with you, or hey, you're not going to get this promotion, or whatever it may be. So that was by Comcast. So any member of the CBC, such as Representative Donald Payne, that takes money from Comcast that has just finished violating your civil rights is blasphemy. It should not happen. And it goes to say, like, if he can do that, then and that's out in public,
Yep.
that there has not been the advocacy that the Congressional Black Caucus has been touting. That's just not true. So,
Does a candidate like myself have the grounds to say, especially that CBC PAC fundraising committee can be guilty of the charge of civil rights washing, meaning that they give the appearance that they are the voice, they are the spokespeople for a certain community back home, yet when the issue's pushed and it comes time to collect the money for fundraising and have institutional strength, they're willing to forego some of those Black historical values? Would it be okay for a candidate like me to come out and publicly say, you are civil rights washing? You're diluting what this cause is about. And a lot of
yes.
people, unfortunately, don't know about it. You know?
Yes, absolutely. There's a verse in the Bible that says you can tell a tree by the fruit that it bears. And you look at the CBC, and what has been the fruit? The fruit is health disparities. The fruit is that we're at the same place at the height of stop and frisk that we are now, as far as the way that Black people are treated. What is the fruit as far as our socioeconomic positionality? What is the fruit as far as our education? What is the fruit in any area, whether it's the justice system or what have you, or real estate? And so, I mean, I think at very least, it's just being kind I think it's kind to just say that this is a dysfunctional group. I could probably say a whole bunch of other things, which I won't do. But at the very minimum, they're not doing the job that they have portrayed themselves to do. They're not doing the advocacy. They're not working on the behalf of Black people, of ADOS people. So,
John, I think at this point, I've heard enough. Earlier, you said you're not an educator, but you just educated myself and our audience, albeit small, because I know it's a Zoom call. And NJ-10 likes that in-person contact, which we're really striving for. If you want to join the campaign, ADOS platform, but more importantly, you can email us directly or find us on social media directly. You private message us, and we promise to be responsive. floraforcongress@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. John, do you have any contact info that anybody watching, if they'd like more info or to get a hold of you personally?
Sure. You can get a hold of ADOS New Jersey on our Facebook page. So
Okay.
that's ADOS NJ. Go to the Facebook. We also have a Twitter account. So you can contact us there. I would say the best thing to do is probably just reach out on the Facebook page, message one of us if you want, and we can provide more information. One of the other things I just wanted to mention regarding the healthcare disparities are ACEs. So that stands for ACEs. That stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And those are a driving force behind why we're seeing some of these disparities, whether it be COVID-19, cardiovascular, high blood pressure, any of these other issues. It's tied to some of these socioeconomic conditions that we actually spoke about earlier. So
Great. Well, thank you for the additional acronym.
no
I got
problem.
more homework to do, teacher. I'm going to call you professor if that's all right.
Sure.
Thank you, John, and thank you, ADOS, for lending us John Robinson today. And we look forward to our next Zoom chat with somebody else in the district who deeply is passionate about a part of our platform that we want to get out there and represent all of you on. So thank you, John, and have a great night.
Okay, thanks. You too, John.